Find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and settle in. Some drives end the moment you reach your exit. Others stay with you long after you've turned off the engine. Tonight, you'll hear 4 chilling encounters from people who took the wrong road, stopped at the wrong rest area, or simply drove a little too far into the kind of dark where something was already waiting. So take a deep breath, listen closely, and welcome to Echoes in the Dark.
I want to say up front that I'm not the kind of person who believes in things like this. I've driven for work my whole adult life, thousands of nights on thousands of stretches of empty highway, and I've always thought the stories other drivers tell about hitchhikers, about lights in the trees, about places you shouldn't stop, were just a way of staying entertained on long, boring routes. I still mostly believe that. I just make one exception now, for one particular rest stop, on one particular night, and I don't expect anyone to believe me the way I didn't believe the others. It was late October, and I was hauling a short load up through a stretch of highway I didn't usually run, filling in for a driver who'd called out sick. Unfamiliar route, unfamiliar hours. I'd started later than I meant to, and by 11 at night I was still 4 hours from the drop-off, tired in that specific grainy way where your eyes feel like they've been lightly sanded. The rest stop appeared on my GPS almost exactly where I needed it. Mile 118, a little pull-off with parking, vending machines, a single squat brick building for restrooms, no gas station attached, no all-night diner, nothing but the basic minimum a rest stop is required to have. When I pulled in, there were only 2 other vehicles in the lot. An old sedan parked crookedly near the far end, and a small camper van closer to the building, its curtains drawn, no lights on inside. I told myself 20 minutes, just enough to splash water on my face, get a coffee from the vending machine if it worked, stretch my legs, and get back on the road with enough alertness to finish the drive safely. That was the whole plan. I want that on record, because it's important later. I never intended to be there long. The restroom building was lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube that buzzed like it was thinking about giving up entirely. It smelled like every remote rest stop restroom smells, and it was, as far as I could tell, completely empty. I did what I needed to do, splashed the water on my face like I'd planned, and looked at myself in the mirror for a second longer than usual, the way you do when you're trying to convince your own reflection that you're more awake than you feel. That's when I heard it. A single, deliberate knock on the outside of the restroom's exterior wall. Not on a door. There wasn't a door on that side, just the brick wall of the building. Just one knock, low, at about chest height, like someone had rapped their knuckles once against the brick as they walked past. I told myself it was nothing, a branch, a stray dog, someone in the parking lot who'd bumped into the building. I dried my hands and walked back outside. The lot looked exactly the way I'd left it. Same 2 cars, no people, no dogs, no branches close enough to the building to explain the sound. I stood there for a moment, scanning the tree line that ran along the back edge of the rest stop, and saw nothing but the ordinary black shapes of trees against a slightly less black sky. I decided I was more tired than I'd realized, and that was, in a way, true, just not for the reasons I was telling myself. The vending machine took my money without complaint, at least, dispensing a lukewarm coffee that tasted like it had been sitting in that machine since a previous presidential administration. I drank it anyway, leaning against my truck, trying to give myself a few more minutes before getting back on the road. That's when I noticed the man. He was sitting on the single bench near the restroom entrance, and I hadn't seen him walk there, not from either of the 2 parked vehicles, not from the tree line, not from anywhere. He was simply there, the way a piece of furniture is there, like he'd been sitting in that exact spot the whole time, and I'd somehow failed to notice him until just now. Middle-aged, plain jacket, hands folded in his lap, staring out at the empty highway rather than at me. I nodded at him the way you do with strangers at rest stops, that small, non-committal acknowledgement that says I see you, I mean no trouble, we don't need to speak. He didn't nod back. He didn't move at all, actually, beyond what looked like breathing, slow and even. I finished my coffee faster than I meant to and told myself it was time to go. Getting back in the truck, I did the thing every driver does without thinking about it. Checked my mirrors, checked my surroundings, made sure nothing was going to roll out in front of me as I pulled out. And in the side mirror, for just a fraction of a second before I looked away, I saw the man on the bench facing directly toward my truck instead of the highway. I told myself I'd misjudged the angle. People shift position. It happens. I pulled out of the lot and got back onto the highway, already feeling the tension in my shoulders start to loosen with distance, the way it always does once you're moving again. About 6 miles up the road, my check engine light came on. I want to be clear that this truck had been through inspection 3 weeks earlier. Spotless, no flagged issues, nothing that should have caused a warning light at 11:40 at night on an unfamiliar highway. But there it was, glowing amber on the dash, and a moment later, the engine note changed. A rough, uneven stutter that no experienced driver mistakes for nothing. I made the call every driver dreads making at that hour. I turned around and headed back to the rest stop, the only safe place to pull off and assess what was happening before the engine did something worse at highway speed. The lot looked the same as I'd left it. Same 2 cars. The man was gone from the bench. I got out, popped the hood, and did what I could by flashlight, though I already suspected, correctly as it turned out, that whatever was wrong wasn't something I'd be fixing myself in a rest stop parking lot at midnight. I called the company's emergency line, got put on hold, got told a tow and inspection could be arranged, but wouldn't reach me until early morning given how remote the location was. 4, maybe 5 hours. Nothing to do but wait. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and settled in the way you learn to when a long-haul job occasionally strands you somewhere you didn't plan to be. I've slept in worse places. I told myself this would be an inconvenience, not an ordeal, and for the first hour or so, that's exactly what it was. Then I woke up. I hadn't meant to fall asleep at all, but exhaustion doesn't ask permission, to the sound of someone testing my door handle, not knocking, not asking. Just the low, mechanical click of someone trying the handle from outside, slow and deliberate, once, then again a few seconds later, then a third time. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, heart going hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, and looked into the side mirror. There was no one visible. The handle clicked a 4th time, exactly as evenly spaced as the previous 3, like whoever, or whatever, was testing it wasn't in any hurry, wasn't afraid of being caught, was simply confirming, methodically, that the door was locked. Then it stopped. No footsteps walking away, no sound at all, just the ordinary hum of the parking lot lights and my own breathing, which I was suddenly aware of as far too loud. I checked my phone. No signal, not weak, not spotty, simply gone, the little icon showing nothing at all where 2 bars had been an hour earlier. I checked the clock instead. 1:47 a.m. I told myself, in the voice I used to talk myself through problems on the road, that this was almost certainly another driver. Someone stranded like me, checking to see if my truck was occupied before deciding whether to ask for help, and that they'd simply given up and moved on when they got no response. It was a reasonable explanation. I clung to it the way you cling to any explanation that lets you feel less afraid. That reasonable feeling lasted about 20 minutes, until I noticed the sedan. The old sedan that had been parked crookedly at the far end of the lot when I first arrived was now parked directly beside my truck, close enough that I couldn't have opened my driver's side door without hitting it. I hadn't heard an engine. I hadn't seen headlights move across the lot. It was simply there now, close enough to touch, its windows dark, no sign of a driver inside. I did not get out to check. I want that understood clearly. Every instinct I had told me, in the plainest possible terms, that getting out of the truck was the single worst thing I could do, and for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I listened to that instinct completely, without arguing myself out of it. I climbed into the back of the cab instead, as far from both doors as the space allowed, and sat there with my knees pulled up, watching the windows, telling myself that morning was still hours away, but that hours end eventually, that towing companies do eventually arrive, that this was simply a very bad night and not something more than that. The knocking came back around 2:30, not on the door this time, on the windshield, a single knuckle, low near the wiper, exactly where someone standing directly in front of the truck would reach if they leaned in close. I did not look toward the front of the cab. I kept my eyes on the back window instead, irrationally certain that whatever was at the front was somehow less dangerous than whatever might appear behind me if I stopped watching. The knock came again, then a third time, at the same unhurried pace as the door handle before it, testing, patient, entirely unbothered by the fact that I clearly wasn't answering. Then, very quietly, almost gently, I heard my own name. I have never told anyone at the company what my legal name is versus what I go by day to day. It's a small, private habit, more superstition than logic, something I've done since I was young. The name that came from just outside the windshield, low and almost affectionate, was the private one, not the one on my license, not the one dispatch uses, the one only a handful of people, most of them family, have ever actually called me. I'm not going to pretend I handled that moment with any composure. I made a sound I'm not proud of, some strangled, wordless thing, and pressed myself back hard against the rear wall of the cab, staring at nothing, waiting for whatever came next. What came next was silence. A long, uninterrupted, almost unbearable silence that stretched on so completely that I began to wonder, in the specific delirious logic of someone who hasn't slept properly in over 18 hours, whether I'd imagined the entire last 3 hours out of pure exhaustion. Then headlights swept across the lot. An actual tow truck, actual halogen headlights, an actual human driver climbing out and walking toward my cab, with the easy, unbothered posture of someone doing a completely ordinary job at a completely ordinary hour. I have never in my life felt anything like the relief of that moment. The sedan, I registered distantly, was back at the far end of the lot, parked crookedly, exactly where it had been when I'd first arrived, as though it had never moved at all. I got out of the truck on legs that barely held me, gave the tow driver the world's least coherent explanation of a mechanical problem, and rode in the tow truck's passenger seat back toward the nearest town, refusing, with a firmness that surprised even me, to be left alone at that rest stop again for even a single minute while paperwork was sorted out. The truck, it turned out, had a genuinely faulty sensor, an explainable, mundane mechanical issue with absolutely nothing supernatural about it. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters. The practical crisis of the night had a boring, ordinary cause. It was everything else that happened around it that I've never been able to explain. I finished the delivery late, on a different truck, and told my dispatcher I wasn't taking that route again if I could help it. She didn't ask why. I got the sense, from the careful way she avoided the question, that she already knew, or at least suspected, and simply didn't want to be the one to say it out loud. It's been almost 2 years now. I still drive for a living. I still take overnight routes when the pay is good enough, because the truth is, I need the work the same as anyone else in this line of it. But I don't stop at unfamiliar rest stops after dark anymore, not for any reason, not even an empty gas tank. I'd rather coast on fumes to the next town than risk another lot like that one. And there's one small thing that stayed with me, something I've never quite been able to explain to my own satisfaction. Every so often, not often, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, always late at night, always when I'm alone in the cab, I hear a single, low knock, not on glass, not on metal, just once, quiet, patient, coming from somewhere I can never quite locate. I never answer it. I've learned that much at least. I just keep driving, and eventually every time it stops.
I took the overnight run because the money was good, and I needed the money. That's really the whole reason. Not some deep love of driving through the dark, not some romantic idea about the open road. I needed to make rent, and a regional freight company was paying almost double for anyone willing to take the graveyard route, an overnight haul along Route 9, from the distribution warehouse outside the city, up through the long stretch of nothing that runs beside the state forest, to a drop-off point almost 4 hours north. The dispatcher who signed me up, a tired-sounding man named Wallace, mentioned almost as an afterthought that the truck I'd be driving had belonged to another driver, someone named Denny Vance, who'd done the same overnight route for years before he quietly stopped showing up for shifts. Wallace didn't know the details, or didn't want to say. Company policy, probably. I didn't ask twice. I just needed the truck and the money. The truck itself was unremarkable. An older model, well used, smelling faintly of stale coffee and pine air freshener that had long since stopped doing its job. I did my walk around, checked the lights, climbed into the cab, and that's when I found the logbook. It was tucked into the side pocket of the driver's door, the kind of cheap spiral notebook you'd buy at a gas station for a couple of dollars. Water-stained cover, no name on it. I almost didn't open it, figured it was just fuel receipts, mileage logs, the boring paperwork every long-haul driver keeps. But I had 20 minutes before my scheduled departure, and curiosity is a hard thing to argue with at 11 at night in an empty parking lot. The first several pages were exactly what I expected. Dates, times, mileage, notes about traffic and weather. Denny Vance's handwriting, I assumed, though there was no name to confirm it. Small, cramped, the handwriting of someone used to writing while half thinking about something else. Fuel stop at mile 40. Rain past the junction. Deer near mile 65. No incident. It was almost soothing, honestly. The kind of dull procedural writing that makes a long night feel manageable. I flipped through a few more pages, thinking I'd just confirm the truck's maintenance history and get moving. Then the entries started to change. Not abruptly. That's the thing I want to be clear about. Because when I try to explain this to people afterward, they always want a single moment where it turned strange. And there wasn't one. It was gradual, the way a fever creeps up on you before you realize you're sick. An entry from what looked like maybe 6 months into the job read, Mile 74. Something on the shoulder tonight. Thought it was a hitchhiker, but it didn't move when the brights hit it. Kept driving. Probably nothing. A few entries later. Mile 74 again. Same spot. Starting to think it's a marker of some kind. Reflective paint, maybe. Made a note to look during the day sometime. Never remembered to check. The pattern held for a stretch. Ordinary trucking notes, interrupted every so often by a short, almost embarrassed-sounding line about the thing at mile 74. Always brief, always dismissed. The kind of note you'd write to make yourself feel like you were tracking something, without really wanting to think too hard about what it was. I checked the clock on the dash. I still had time before I had to leave, so I kept reading, telling myself I was just being responsible. Getting to know the route through someone else's experience, like reading a trail guide before a hike. Then, maybe 2/3 of the way through the book, the entries changed again. The handwriting got smaller, tighter, like someone pressing harder on the pen, trying to make the words take up less space in the world. Mile 74. It was closer to the road tonight. I know I said I wouldn't keep writing about this, but I don't know who else to tell. It has been the same height every time. I've started timing it. Always right around 1:15 a.m. I looked at the clock again. It was 11:20. I had almost 2 hours before I'd be anywhere near mile 74, whatever that meant on this particular route. I told myself that was a good thing. Distance. Time to think about something else. I kept reading anyway. Mile 74. I brought a coworker along tonight. Told him I just wanted company. He didn't see anything, but the temperature dropped in the cab right when we passed. He noticed that part. Didn't want to talk about it after. Mile 74. I've started driving faster through that stretch. Doesn't seem to matter. It's always there, right as I pass, no matter how fast I'm going. Like it knows exactly when I'll be there, regardless of my speed. There was a gap after that entry, several blank pages, like the writer had stopped for a while, maybe weeks, maybe longer. When the entries picked back up, the tone had shifted from unease into something closer to resignation. I asked Wallace for a different route. He said there wasn't one, that this run's mine as long as I want the extra pay. I need the extra pay. I have a kid starting community college in the fall. I can't just quit over a stretch of road. That line stuck with me longer than I expected. Not because it was frightening, it wasn't, not on its own, but because it was so plainly, achingly human. A man weighing his family's future against something he couldn't explain to anyone, choosing every night to drive back into it because the alternative was worse in a different way. I understood that. I was doing something similar myself, taking this route for money I needed and questions I didn't want to ask too loudly. I checked my phone. 11:35. Still time. I turned another page. Mile 74. It spoke tonight. I don't know how else to describe it. Not words, not really. More like the shape of words, formed the way you can sometimes tell what someone's saying through a closed door, without hearing the actual sounds. I couldn't make out what it wanted. I didn't stop to find out. Mile 74. I think it's getting closer to the road each time. I've started measuring with the odometer, marking exactly where I see it. 6 inches closer this week than last month. I know that sounds insane written down. I don't care anymore. I'm keeping the notes because if something happens to me, I want someone to be able to see the pattern. I set the logbook down for a moment, on the passenger seat, and looked out the windshield at the empty parking lot. the sodium lights buzzing faintly overhead. It occurred to me, in a way that felt almost embarrassing, that I had a choice here. I could put the logbook back in the door pocket, start the truck, and drive my route without opening it again. Plenty of drivers before me clearly had. The notebook wasn't the property of the company. No one had told me to read it. No one was making me finish it. But I've never been good at leaving things unfinished. That's probably always been my worst quality. I picked it back up. The final third of the logbook was different from everything before it. The dates became less regular, sometimes days apart, sometimes weeks, as though Denny had started skipping the route when he could, taking other shifts, avoiding it as much as the job allowed. But whenever an entry did appear, mile 74 was always there. Mile 74. I tried taking a different truck tonight, thought maybe it was following the truck rather than the driver. Made no difference. It's not the truck. Mile 74. I brought my daughter's old baby monitor along. Figured if it made sound, I might catch something on the audio. Nothing showed up when I played it back, but there's 12 seconds of silence in the recording, where I know, for a fact, I was talking. I remember what I said. It's just not there. Mile 74. I think it's not really at mile 74. I think it's using mile 74 the way you'd use a doorway. That's just where it happens to come through. I don't know what's on the other side of that door, but I don't think it's very far away from wherever I am, even now, even sitting in my kitchen writing this. That last one made the hair on my arm stand up in a way none of the others quite had. Not because it described anything visible, it didn't, but because of how calm the handwriting looked. Steady, almost peaceful, the way people sometimes get after they've stopped fighting something and started simply living alongside it. There were only a handful of entries left after that. I read them slowly, aware in some part of my mind that I was stalling, that I still had to actually start this drive at some point, that the clock on the dash was ticking toward midnight whether or not I wanted it to. I asked Wallace again about switching routes. He offered me a daytime run instead, lower pay, but available starting next month. I told him I'd think about it. I don't think I will take it. I don't think IT will let me. I don't know how to explain what I mean by that. It's not that I feel threatened, exactly. It's more like an appointment. Like something on the calendar you can move around a little, delay for a while, but never actually cancel. I get the sense, driving past mile 74 lately, that it isn't hunting me. It's waiting for me. Those feel like very different things, and I don't know which one is worse. The very last entry was dated, and I did the math without wanting to. It was almost exactly 6 months ago tonight, to the day. It was shorter than any of the others, just a few lines, the handwriting slightly uneven in a way the others hadn't been. Taking the route tonight feels different somehow. Can't explain it. If anyone reads this after me, I don't know who else will drive this truck, but if you're reading this, don't stop at mile 74. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, just keep driving. I think that's the only thing that's actually kept me safe this long. I never stopped. I'm going to try to remember that tonight. Below that, nothing. No further entries, just blank pages. Dozens of them, all empty, stretching to the back cover of the notebook like the rest of a story that had simply stopped being written. I sat there for a long moment in the cab, engine still off, the logbook open on my lap. I thought about calling Wallace, asking him directly what had happened to Denny Vance, whether anyone had ever actually confirmed he was okay, or whether he'd simply stopped showing up the way people sometimes do when a job or a life becomes too much. I thought about calling in sick, taking a different shift, letting someone else drive this particular truck down this particular road tonight. But I needed the money. That's the plain, unglamorous truth of it. I put the logbook in the glove box instead of the door pocket, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. The first hour of the drive was uneventful in the specific way that feels loud with its own quiet. Every stretch of dark road, every pair of distant taillights, every gas station sign glowing faintly on the horizon felt like it was holding its breath along with me. I kept the radio on low, mostly for the sound of another voice, though I couldn't have told you a single word the DJ said. At around mile 50, according to the truck's odometer, I started doing math in my head I didn't want to be doing. 24 miles left until 74, then 20, then 15. I told myself I wasn't going to look for anything. I told myself, quite reasonably, that Denny Vance's notebook was the record of one man's spiral, possibly brought on by exhaustion, isolation, the particular kind of sleep-deprived paranoia that overnight driving can create in anyone, and that I had absolutely no reason to expect anything different from an ordinary stretch of highway. At mile 70, I checked the clock. 1:09 a.m. At mile 72, I eased off the gas slightly, not because I meant to, but because some old animal part of my brain had already decided to be careful. At mile 74, exactly, at 1:15 a.m., the temperature in the cab dropped. I want to be honest about what I actually saw, because I've turned it over so many times since that night that I sometimes doubt my own memory of it, the way you doubt anything you've replayed too often. There was, for just a moment, a shape at the edge of the headlights, low against the tree line, roughly the height a person would be if that person were crouched and waiting. It didn't move. I didn't slow down to check whether it would. What I remember most clearly isn't the shape at all. It's the sound, faint, almost underneath the engine noise, like a voice trying to speak through a wall, shaping words I couldn't make out no matter how hard some reflexive part of my mind strained to understand them. I thought about Denny's last entry. Don't stop, just keep driving. I kept driving. The sound faded somewhere around mile 76. The temperature climbed back to normal a mile after that. By the time I reached the drop-off point, 4 hours later, the sun was starting to threaten the horizon, and my hands ached from how tightly I'd been gripping the wheel the entire way. I finished the delivery, drove the empty truck back to the depot, and put the logbook back in the glove box exactly where I'd left it, unable to quite bring myself to throw it away, and equally unable to bring myself to take it home. I still drive that route sometimes, when the schedule calls for it. I've never told Wallace what I read, and I've never asked him again what actually happened to the driver before me. Some questions, I've decided, are better left the way Denny left his logbook. Mostly finished, mostly explained, with just enough left unsaid that you can still tell yourself, on your better days, that it wasn't real. But I always slow down, just slightly, right around mile 74, and I always make sure the radio's on. And no matter what I hear, or think I hear, in that stretch of road between 1:14 and 1:16 in the morning, I never, ever stop.
What I'm about to share with you was submitted anonymously to an online forum about 8 months ago. The post has since been deleted. The account that uploaded it was active for exactly 4 days before going dark. I've seen a lot of found documents, a lot of real accounts that turned out to be fiction, or at least I hope they were fiction. Some of them you read and you know immediately it's a story someone wrote for fun, for attention, for the craft of it. This one is different. I can't explain exactly why. Something in the voice, maybe. The specific mundane details that a person making something up usually skips, the way it trails off. I'm going to read it to you exactly as it was posted. I have added nothing. I have changed nothing. The only thing I've removed is the driver's real name, which I've replaced with a single initial. His name, as far as anyone on that forum was ever able to determine, was probably R. This is his log. Picked these up from a forum post on a trucking board I've been on for years. Original post was made by a driver with the handle Overnight King 88, who I'd seen around the board for maybe 2 years prior. Solid guy, knew his roots, gave good advice about way stations and rest stops, and which truck stops have decent showers. He wasn't the type to post weird stuff. Post was titled Rules for the 491 Corridor, Four Corners Region. Read before you run it. I'm copying them here because Overnight King 88's post got taken down within about 48 hours, and I want them somewhere I can find them. I run the 491 Corridor 4, sometimes 5 times a year. Have for 6 years. Never had a problem. But his post spooked me enough that I figured better safe than sorry. His rules, as best as I copied them. Rule 1. Do not stop for anyone standing on the shoulder. I don't care if it's a woman, a child, a man in a suit, a person who looks injured. Do not stop. Do not slow down. Keep both hands on the wheel and eyes forward. If they're still visible in your mirrors a mile later, do not look again. Rule 2. Do not let your fuel drop below a quarter tank on the stretch between Shiprock and Cortez. There are stations, but they are not always there when you need them to be. Top off at Shiprock every single time, no exceptions, even if you think you have enough. Rule 3. Do not count the mile markers out loud. You can look at them. You can track your progress in your head, but do not say the numbers with your voice. Not to yourself, not into a recorder, not to a passenger. This one sounds stupid. Follow it anyway. Rule 4. If your radio begins playing the same song on repeat, not skipping, not shuffling back, but deliberately repeating, pull off the road immediately. Turn the radio off. Wait a minimum of 10 minutes before continuing. Do not try to change the station while still moving. Pull over first. Rule 5. You will pass a rest area at approximately mile marker 114. It will look open. The lights will be on. There may be other vehicles in the lot. Do not stop there. Do not pull in even to turn around. If you need to check your load or stretch your legs, do it a minimum of 3 miles before or after marker 114, not at 114. Rule 6. Sometime between midnight and 4 in the morning, you may see lights in the desert to the west of the highway. Not on the road, but out in the flats, moving. They will look like vehicle lights. They will behave like vehicle lights. They are not vehicle lights. Do not slow down to watch them. Do not try to identify what they are. If they begin to move toward the highway, accelerate. Rule 7. If you have a passenger and your passenger falls asleep, do not wake them up for any reason until you are through the corridor entirely. Past Cortez, onto 160, headed east. No matter what you see, no matter what happens, do not wake them. Let them sleep through it. This is the kindest thing you can do for them. Rule 8. At some point in the corridor, the exact location varies, so I cannot give you a mile marker. You will hear a voice on your CB that knows your name. It will be friendly. It will be conversational. It will ask reasonable questions. Where you're headed, what you're hauling, how long you've been on the road. Do not answer. Turn the CB off. If you have already answered before you realize what's happening, turn the CB off immediately and do not turn it back on until daylight. Rule 9. If you see an animal on the road, any animal, any size, any species, do not swerve to avoid it. I know what I'm asking. Hold your line. Do not swerve. Trust the vehicle. Rule 10. Whatever you do, regardless of any other rule, regardless of any circumstances, do not pull over and get out of the truck between Shiprock and Cortez after dark. You can stop the truck. You can sit in the cab. But do not open that door and step outside until you are through the corridor and the sun is up. This is the only rule that matters if you forget all the others. Stay in the truck. Overnight, King 88 added one final note at the bottom of his post before it was taken down. I know how this looks. I drove that corridor for 11 years before I stopped. I'm not going to tell you what made me stop. Just follow the rules, all 10 of them, the ones that seem stupid especially. I asked him in the replies what happened if you broke one. He didn't answer that specific question. He replied once more to the thread, to someone else, and then the whole post was gone. I copied the rules. I'm not sure why. I run that corridor. I figured worst case, it cost me nothing to follow some weird rules on a stretch of highway I know by heart. Entry, October 14th. Heading out of Albuquerque at 11 p.m. Refrigerated load. Cortez delivery. Standard run. Weather clear. Temps in the low 50s. Should be easy. Already know this stretch like my own face. Got the rules pulled up on my phone. Read through them in the lot before I hit the highway. Feel slightly ridiculous about that. Topped off the tank at a Flying J outside of town, even though I was at 3/4. Rule 2 says quarter tank, minimum through the corridor. I'm not going to test that one. CB's quiet, radio's on, classic country, the good stuff. Lights of the city behind me now, stars ahead. The Four Corners is ugly and beautiful at the same time in a way that doesn't translate to photographs. You have to be there at night. You have to be out in it, starting to feel good about this run. Entry, October 14th, approximately 12:40 a.m. Crossed into the corridor proper about 20 minutes ago. Shiprock formation off to the east, barely visible in the dark. Just a big black shape that's a little more solid than the sky behind it. I've always liked that rock. Something permanent about it. Everything quiet. No one on the shoulder, no lights in the desert. Radio still on. Been cycling through different songs. Nothing strange. Passed mile marker 114 about 10 minutes ago. Did not pull in. Rest area looked exactly like he said it would. Lit up. 2 vehicles in the lot. Almost inviting. I kept going. Felt strange to pass it, like I was being rude, which is a ridiculous way to feel about a rest stop. CB's been off since Albuquerque. Probably keeping it off until I'm through. So far, nothing. This is either going to be a very boring journal entry or a very useful one. Hoping for boring. Entry, October 14th, approximately 1:15 a.m. Okay, something just happened that I want to write down while it's fresh. Radio cycled back to the same song. Not weird by itself. It's a radio, it repeats. But then it cycled back again. Same song. Third time I noticed. I was watching the mile markers thinking about Rule 3, not saying them out loud, which still feels insane, but here we are. And the song came around a 4th time. I pulled over. Sat there on the shoulder with the hazards on and the radio off and the desert just absolutely dark in every direction. 10 minutes. I timed it. Nothing happened. No one came down the road. No lights in the flats. At 10 minutes exactly, I turned the radio back on. Different song. Has not repeated since. I feel like an idiot for pulling over. I also feel like I'm glad I did. Back on the road. Mile marker 131. Entry, October 14th, approximately 2:05 a.m. I need to document this right now. About 4 miles back, I want to say around marker 141, I saw someone on the shoulder. Right side, headed northbound, same as me. Standing completely still, facing the road. Not walking, not waving, not doing anything. Just standing there in the dark about 2 feet off the white line. I did not stop. Rule 1, but I looked in my mirrors. I know. I read the rule. If they're still visible in your mirrors a mile later, do not look again. But I checked at about a 1/4 mile. The figure was still there, still facing the road, not moving. I told myself I'd check at a mile. I checked at a mile. Still there. I don't know how that's possible. I was moving at 62 miles an hour. A stationary object a mile behind me should be invisible, or close to it. But the figure was there, smaller now, but there, and I could swear it was facing differently, like it had turned. Like it was watching me go. I did not look a 3rd time. That took more effort than I'd like to admit. Entry, October 14th, approximately 2:30 a.m. Can't stop thinking about the figure on the shoulder, so I'm writing to settle my head. I've been going back through the rules. I've followed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 so far without breaking any of them, or mostly without breaking them. I check the mirror at a mile when the rule says not to look again. That feels like a partial break, maybe half a break. I don't know if that matters. Rule 6, the lights in the flats. Nothing yet. Rule 7 doesn't apply, I'm solo. Rule 8, the CB voice, still off. Rules 9 and 10, haven't needed them. Going to make Cortez in about 90 minutes if I keep pace. I'm keeping pace. Everything is fine. Entry, October 14th, approximately 2:58 a.m. The lights in the desert are real. I want to document exactly what I'm seeing because I need this written down. To the west, out in the flats, there are 3 lights, low to the ground, moving parallel to the highway, same direction as me, but out maybe half a mile into the desert. They are the right color and shape for vehicle lights, amber white, slightly diffused, the way headlights look in cold air. But there's no road out there. I know this stretch. There is nothing out there. They've been keeping pace with me for the last 6 minutes. I sped up, 70, the lights sped up. I slowed back to 62. The lights slowed. I'm telling myself it's some kind of military thing. There's reservation land out here, federal land. Could be something official. Survey vehicles, equipment, something that explains it. I'm accelerating. I don't want to wait to find out if they're going to move toward the highway. Entry, October 14th, approximately 3:20 a.m. Lights are gone, lost them somewhere around marker 162, just stopped, or went dark, or whatever they did. I never saw them turn around. They were there, and then they were not. I'm trying to breathe normally. Something else happened about 10 minutes ago, and I almost didn't write it down, because writing it down makes it real. My CB turned on by itself. I had it switched off. I know I had it switched off because I remember the specific physical feeling of clicking the dial at Albuquerque and watching the light go out and thinking that was that. It was off. I watched it turn on. The light came up, the static came in, and before I could reach for the dial, a voice said my name. Not my handle, not my trucking name, my actual name, first and last. The voice was calm and pleasant, the way a person sounds when they're asking you something simple. It said my name and then it said, "Long run tonight." I turned the CB off, got the dial between my fingers and clicked it hard, and the light went out. My hands were shaking. My hands do not shake. I did not answer it. I want to be clear, I did not answer, but it knew my name, my real name. Entry, October 14th, approximately 3:44 a.m. Something is on the road, large. I don't know what it is. My headlights caught it about 200 yards out. Too large for a coyote, wrong shape for a deer, wrong shape for anything I know how to name. It was in my lane, low to the ground, and my instinct, every driver's instinct, was to brake, to pull left, to go around. I held my line. Rule 9. I held my line and I gripped the wheel and I closed my eyes for 1 second, just one, because I could not keep them open. And there was no impact. I'm pulled over right now. I stopped about a quarter mile past where it was. I couldn't keep driving without stopping. I needed a second. I'm sitting here with the hazards on and the engine running and I haven't opened the door. I will not open the door. Rule 10. I'm looking in the passenger mirror. The road behind me is empty. Whatever was there is not there now. I need to keep moving. I know I need to keep moving. One more thing. When I closed my eyes for that 1 second before the impact that didn't come, in that second, I heard the CB click on again. I heard my name again. And then something else. Very quiet, almost gentle, that I can only describe as, "You looked in the mirror." Entry, October 14th, approximately 4:10 a.m. I'm at mile marker 181. Cortez is 23 miles. I have to tell you what just happened because I don't know if I'm going to be in a state to tell it later. The CB came on again. I didn't touch it. Same voice, same friendly conversational tone, like someone calling to catch up with an old friend. It said, "You're doing well, almost through." I reached for the dial. The voice said, "I couldn't do that." I stopped. The voice said, "The song is going to come on again in a few minutes. That one's not for you. Keep driving this time. Don't pull over." I don't know why I'm listening to it. I don't know why I haven't just ripped the CB out of the dash. I think, and this is the thing that's scaring me more than anything that has happened tonight, more than the figure on the shoulder, more than the lights, more than the thing in the road, I think the voice sounds familiar. I can't place it. I've been trying for 10 minutes to place it and I can't. But it's familiar. Entry, October 14th, approximately 4:29 a.m. The song came on. Same song as before. Playing now on a radio I am not touching, at a volume that is slowly getting louder. I'm not pulling over. I'm at marker 189, Cortez in 14 miles. Something is walking alongside the truck. Not behind me, not on the shoulder. Alongside, at window level, matching my speed. I can't see it. I can hear it. I can hear its footsteps on the asphalt, long and slow, one for every two of mine somehow. I am not looking. I am looking at the road. I am doing 68 miles an hour, and I am looking at the road, and I am not opening the door. The song is very loud now. The voice on the CB just said, "Almost there. Don't stop for the next one." Next one? Entry, October 14th, approximately 4:41 a.m. There is someone on the shoulder, different from the first one. This one is moving, not standing, moving, walking toward Cortez, same direction as me. And as my headlights caught them, I think it's a woman. She's not dressed for the cold. She's walking with her arms crossed against her chest, head down, and she's real. She is moving the way a real cold person moves, not the standing stillness of the thing at marker 141. She looks real. She feels real. The CB voice said, "Don't stop." Rule 1 says don't stop for anyone on the shoulder. But she is cold, and it is 4 in the morning, and there is nothing out here, and she is walking, and I am slowing down. I know what the rule says. I know what I've seen tonight. But she is a person, and I can't. She just turned to look at me. I'm going to keep driving. I am going to keep. I found this log the same place most of you did, in the hours before the post was deleted. I don't know who R is. I don't know if he made it to Cortez. I searched news archives for accidents on US 491 in the Four Corners region in mid to late October of last year. I found one incident report, a jackknifed semi-truck located by a state trooper at approximately mile marker 193. Engine still running, load intact, no driver present. The trooper's report notes the cab door was found open. No driver was ever located. I've tried to find Overnight King 88 on every trucking forum I can access. His account is gone. His post history is gone. Nobody who replied to his original thread seems to remember it clearly. I've reached out to 3 people who I know left comments, and 2 of them say they don't recall the thread at all, which isn't the kind of thing you forget. The 3rd one replied to my message with 2 words and then blocked me. The 2 words were, "Follow them." I don't know what that means. I'm choosing to believe it means follow the rules. I'm choosing to believe R made a mistake, and it was a human mistake. A real person on the shoulder, cold and stranded, and he couldn't reconcile what he'd seen with what he was seeing, and he made the wrong call. I want to believe that. But I've driven parts of that corridor myself, and I've thought about Rule 3 a lot lately. The one about the mile markers, about not saying the numbers out loud. Because when I drove that stretch, I counted quietly to myself the way I always do on long runs. And around marker 158, I realized I had said one number aloud without meaning to. Not in a normal voice, just a murmur, just the reflex of a tired driver marking progress. And somewhere out in the flats to the west, something moved toward the highway. I hit the gas. It didn't follow me to the road. I don't know what would have happened if it had. I'm not going back to find out. But if you run that corridor, if you've ever run that corridor, or if you're planning to, please find a copy of these rules somewhere. Copy them down. Put them in your glove box. Follow all 10 of them, the ones that seem the most ridiculous, especially.
I drove a regional delivery route for almost 6 years before any of this happened. Mostly medical supplies between hospital systems. The kind of job where you learn every back road and shortcut in a 100-mile radius without ever really thinking about why those roads exist or what's supposed to be out there with you. I mention that only because I wanted understood, going into this, that I wasn't someone easily spooked by an empty highway at night. I'd driven thousands of them. This was just one more, until it wasn't. The route that night ran south through a stretch of country I didn't usually cover, filling in for a coworker who'd had a family emergency. It cut through a low, flat valley where the highway crossed a series of small creeks and irrigation channels, the kind of unremarkable water crossings you drive over so often you stop registering them as water at all. Just a slight dip in the road, a low concrete guardrail, gone again in a few seconds. An older coworker, a woman named Rosa who'd grown up in that valley, had mentioned the route to me once in passing, months before I ever actually drove it. She'd said, almost as an aside while we loaded a truck one afternoon, that if I ever ran that stretch at night, I shouldn't stop near the water crossings, no matter what I heard. I remember laughing a little, the way you do at advice that sounds like it belongs in an old story rather than a work conversation, and she hadn't laughed back. She'd just said, "I'm serious. If you hear crying, keep driving," and went back to loading boxes, like she hadn't said anything unusual at all. I thought about that exchange exactly once more before that night, briefly, with mild amusement, and then forgot about it entirely, the way you forget almost anything that doesn't immediately concern you. It was a little past 10 when I crossed into the valley, already tired in the specific, low-grade way that comes from a longer shift than planned, the headlights carving a narrow, steady tunnel through a darkness that felt thicker out there than it had any real reason to be. No moon that night, thin cloud cover, the kind of black that makes your own headlights feel like the only light left in the world. The first creek crossing came about 20 minutes into the valley, a small concrete bridge no more than 30 feet across, barely worth noticing except for the faint, almost sweet smell of standing water that drifted briefly through the truck's cabin vents as I crossed it. I didn't think anything of it. Water smells like water. I kept driving. It was the second crossing, maybe 15 minutes later, where I first heard something. Faint at first, so faint I genuinely wasn't certain I'd heard anything at all, rather than some trick of tire noise on old asphalt. A thin, high sound, almost like wind moving across the mouth of a bottle, except there was no wind that night. the air dead calm in a way I only registered in hindsight. I glanced at my mirrors out of pure reflex, saw nothing, and told myself it had been exactly what it sounded like from a distance. Wind, tires, some ordinary highway noise I simply hadn't identified yet. I want to be honest that I didn't think of Rosa's warning in that moment. It would be a cleaner story if I had, if some instinct had immediately connected the sound to her advice. But the truth is messier than that. I just kept driving, mildly curious, not especially alarmed. The third crossing, another 10 minutes further, was where the sound came back, and this time there was no explaining it away as tire noise or wind. It was crying. Not the vague, ambient hush I'd heard before, but something unmistakably, specifically like a child crying. Thin, distressed, carrying clearly over the sound of my own engine in a way that no ordinary ambient noise should have been able to. It seemed to come from somewhere off to the right, toward the dark tangle of brush and water below the bridge's low concrete rail. I slowed down. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters. My first instinct, hearing what sounded exactly like a frightened child crying alone near a creek at 10:30 at night, was not fear. It was concern. It's the kind of sound that overrides caution in most people, and it very nearly overrode mine. I eased off the gas, scanning the dark brush along the water's edge as I crossed, my headlights sweeping uselessly over tangled shadow and the black gleam of shallow water. I saw nothing. The crying seemed to shift as I passed, moving, or seeming to move, further into the brush away from the road, and for just a moment, some old, sensible part of my brain reasserted itself enough to remember, finally, what Rosa had told me months earlier.
If you hear crying, keep driving.
I didn't stop. I want that clearly understood, because I think it's the single decision that kept the rest of that night from ending very differently. But I did slow down, longer than I should have, staring hard into the dark at the water's edge, and I think, looking back, that hesitation alone was enough to be noticed. The crying stopped abruptly the moment I accelerated back to normal speed, cutting off mid-sound in a way no real crying child ever does, the way a recording stops when someone simply lifts their finger off a button. That abruptness unsettled me more than the crying itself had. I drove the next several miles considerably faster than I should have, checking my mirrors far more often than the empty highway behind me warranted. There were 2 more crossings before the valley finally opened back into flatter, drier ground, and I want to describe what happened at each of them carefully, because this is where the night stopped being merely strange and became something I still don't fully know how to hold in my memory without my hands going cold. At the 4th crossing, the crying came back, closer this time, no longer drifting from somewhere off to the side, but seeming to come from directly beneath the bridge itself, rising up through the concrete in a way that felt less like sound traveling and more like sound originating from somewhere the road itself passed directly over. I did not slow down this time. I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes forward, the way you'd hold a steering wheel through black ice, purely mechanical, purely committed to the single task of simply continuing forward. The crying as I crossed shifted into words. Not clearly, not in any language I could confidently name, but shaped, unmistakably, like speech straining to form itself out of that same high, thin wailing. And within that shifting, wordless sound, I heard, with a clarity that turned my whole body cold, my own name. I have never told anyone outside my immediate family the nickname my grandmother used for me as a small child. A soft, affectionate variation of my given name that stopped being used by anyone the moment she passed away almost 15 years ago. That was the name I heard called from beneath that bridge, in a voice pitched exactly like a grieving woman's, exactly like someone calling out for a child she'd lost and was desperate, aching to find again. I did not stop. I want that understood as clearly as I can manage to say it. Every instinct in my body screamed to pull over, to go back, to find whoever was crying out there in my grandmother's shape of my own name. I gripped the wheel hard enough that my knuckles ached and forced myself to keep driving, faster now, the 5th crossing already visible ahead in my headlights. The 5th crossing was where I saw her. She stood at the edge of the water, just beyond the low concrete rail, dressed in something pale and shapeless that seemed to hang wrong on her frame. Wrong in a way I couldn't immediately place. Too still, too undisturbed by a wind I could feel clearly through my own cracked window. Her hair hung forward, obscuring her face entirely, and her hands were pressed together at her chest in a posture of searching, desperate prayer. She did not move as my headlights swept across her. She simply turned, slowly, deliberately, to face the road as I approached, and for one single terrible instant before I was past her entirely, I saw beneath the dark curtain of her hair, not a face at all, but something closer to an absence where a face should have been. A wrongness I have never been able to describe to anyone in a way that feels adequate. A hollow, grieving shape wearing the outline of a woman without any of the features that would make her one. I have since learned, in the months after that night, doing research I couldn't stop myself from doing no matter how much I told myself I didn't want to know, that this is an old story told across generations in that region. A grieving spirit, always near water, always weeping, always searching for children she lost and cannot find, sometimes calling out in voices meant to draw the living close enough to mistake for her own lost family. The old stories call her La Llorona. They say she is bound to water, drawn to crossings in rivers and creeks, and that the old protection against her was never to answer her crying, never to look directly at her face, and if you found yourself too close, to make the sign of the cross and keep walking, keep driving, keep moving, no matter what she called you. I did not know any of that as I drove past her that night. I only knew, with the same old animal certainty that had kept me from stopping at the crossing before, that I needed to keep my eyes forward and my foot steady on the gas, and that whatever I had just seen was not something I was equipped in any way to understand or confront. The sixth and final crossing came less than a mile later, and it was there that the truck's engine, without warning, without any prior sign of trouble, began to stutter. I want to be honest that I don't know, even now, whether that was mechanical coincidence or something else entirely, though I've never fully believed in the coincidence explanation, not after everything else that night. The engine caught, faltered, caught again, losing speed rapidly on a stretch of road with nowhere safe to simply stop, the final water crossing looming directly ahead in my rapidly slowing headlights. The crying started again as the truck slowed, and this time it did not stay near the water. It seemed to move alongside me, matching my failing speed with an ease that had nothing to do with running or walking, keeping perfect pace just beyond the reach of my headlights on the passenger side, calling my grandmother's name for me over and over in that same aching, desperate voice. The engine died completely, a car length short of the bridge itself. Not stuttered, not faltered, died all at once. The dashboard going dark, the headlights dimming to nothing, the truck rolling forward on its own dwindling momentum until it came to a stop, with the front bumper almost touching the low concrete rail at the near edge of the water. I turned the key. Nothing. Not even the click of a dead battery trying and failing. Just silence, total and absolute. The kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses against your ears the way water does. That was when the passenger window, which I had cracked earlier for air and never thought to close, was pulled the rest of the way down from the outside. I want to describe what happened next as clearly as I can, because I've relived it enough times that I trust the shape of it, even if I can't fully explain the mechanics. A hand came through the gap, pale, too long in the fingers, cold enough that I felt the temperature drop in the cab before I ever saw it, and closed around my forearm with a grip that had nothing gentle left in it at all. It was not searching. It was not testing. It pulled, immediately and with tremendous force, dragging me sideways across the bench seat toward the open window and the water beyond it. I still have the marks from that grip, faint now, more scar than bruise. 4 narrow lines on the inside of my forearm that never fully faded the way an ordinary bruise does. I didn't understand, in the moment, how something without visible weight or mass could pull with that kind of strength, only that I was being pulled, that my shoulder had already cleared the window frame, that the smell of standing water was suddenly everywhere, filling the cab. I braced my other hand against the steering wheel and pulled back with everything I had left in me, screaming something I don't remember the words to, and for one endless second, neither of us gave any ground at all. The two of us locked in the kind of terrible, silent tug that felt like it might genuinely tear my arm from its socket before it ended one way or the other. What broke it, in the end, wasn't strength. It was the engine. The truck coughed back to life beneath me, headlights flaring, dashboard lighting up all at once, and in that sudden flood of ordinary electric light, the grip on my arm loosened, just enough, just for a fraction of a second, and I wrenched myself backward across the seat with everything left in my body. I don't remember finding the gas pedal so much as simply being on it, the truck lurching forward across the last few feet of bridge deck, with the passenger door swinging wide open beside me. Empty. Nothing in the seat, nothing in the window, only the cold night air rushing in where a moment earlier there had been a hand closed around my arm, hard enough to bruise bone. I did not stop driving until I reached a gas station nearly 20 miles further on, brightly lit, mundane, blessedly full of the ordinary hum of fluorescent light, and a bored clerk behind the counter who looked at me when I finally walked in, cradling my arm against my chest, with the particular alarm reserved for someone who has very clearly been hurt. He asked if I needed him to call someone. I told him I'd been in a minor accident. It was, in its own way, true enough. The 4 marks on my forearm never went fully purple the way a normal bruise does. They stayed pale, almost bloodless, for nearly 2 weeks, tender to the touch long after any ordinary injury would have faded, before finally settling into the thin, faint lines that are still there now. Visible if you know to look for them, easy to miss if you don't. I finished the route the next morning, in daylight, refusing outright to attempt that valley again after dark, and I never took that particular fill-in shift again, not once, not for any amount of overtime pay offered. I told Rosa what happened, eventually, and she didn't seem surprised by any of it, only quietly, gently insistent that I'd done the one thing that mattered, the one thing her own family had always said kept you safe out there. You didn't stop. You didn't look too long. That's all it ever takes. It's been 3 years now. I still drive for a living, though I've arranged my routes wherever possible to avoid running anywhere near open water after dark. A habit my current coworkers find mildly amusing and have never once heard the actual reason for. I keep a small, unremarkable cross on my keychain now, a gift from Rosa that I've never taken off. And though I couldn't tell you with any confidence whether it does anything at all, I've never once considered removing it. I still have the marks on my forearm. A doctor I finally saw weeks later, once the tenderness hadn't faded the way it should have, measured them, photographed them for the file, and told me, with the careful neutrality doctors use when they don't actually have an answer, that he couldn't identify a cause consistent with any injury he recognized. I don't bring it up anymore. I wear long sleeves more often than I used to, not out of any real attempt to hide it, just a quiet preference not to have to explain 4 faint lines that never tan, never fully fade, and ache faintly every so often, whenever I'm anywhere near moving water after dark. And there's one small thing that's never quite left me beyond that, something I've never been able to fully explain, even to myself. Whenever I cross a bridge now, any bridge, anywhere, over any body of water, no matter how small, I find myself, without meaning to, briefly holding my breath until I'm clear on the other side. As if some old, quiet part of me is still waiting, every single time, to feel a cold hand close around my arm again, before I'm safely on the other bank. That's where tonight's stories end, though I suspect, for at least one of you listening, the road doesn't feel quite as empty as it did an hour ago. Maybe you'll think twice next time a rest stop looks a little too quiet, or a voice on the radio sounds a little too familiar, or someone standing on the shoulder a little too still. If these stories kept you company tonight, let them keep doing that. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us which story stayed with you longest, and which kind of encounter you want us to tell next. Until then, stay off the shoulder, keep your eyes on the road, and don't answer if something calls your name. Good night, and thank you for spending this time with Echoes in the Dark.